Welcome to WikiPodcast.
Great to be here.
Today, we're kicking off our philosophy mini-series, Existentialism and Modern Thought.
And we're starting with a big one, Friedrich Nietzsche.
Absolutely. We're doing a deep dive specifically into two of his, well, let's say most talked about ideas, the Übermensch and the will to power.
Concepts that are definitely powerful and, often kind of misunderstood.
Right. So our mission today is really to unpack these, drawing on what we know about Nietzsche, and give you a clearer picture.
Think of it as a shortcut through some complex thinking, getting to the core of why these ideas still grab people.
Exactly. So maybe we should start with the man himself. Set the stage a bit.
Good idea. Context is key with Nietzsche. So Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, German, lived 1844 to 1900.
And he wasn't just a philosopher?
No, started as a classical philologist. That's the study of language and historical texts. Also a poet, composer, quite the range.
And he found success early, didn't he? In academia?
Amazingly early. He became professor of classical philology at the University of Basel in 1869.
Wow.
Yeah, he was only 24, which was, basically unprecedented.
But that academic career didn't last too long.
No, it didn't. He was plagued by pretty severe health problems, migraines, eyesight issues.
Oh.
So he had to resign his professorship in 1879.
That must have been tough.
You'd think so, but ironically, leaving academia seemed to,
Well,
it opened the floodgates. The next decade was his most prolific writing period.
so stepping back actually pushed him forward, philosophically speaking.
It seems that way. It's when his really groundbreaking ideas took shape. But then,
Is the later part of his life.
yes,
Mhm.
tragically in 1889, when he was just 44, he had a complete mental collapse.
And he never recovered.
No, he lived for another decade, but under the care of his mother and then his sister. He died in 1900.
Such a sharp mind, ending that way. And his legacy got complicated after his death, too, didn't it?
Hugely complicated. This is really important. His sister, Elizabeth Thirster Nietzsche, took control of his unpublished notes and manuscripts.
And she had her own agenda.
Oh, definitely. She was deeply ultranationalist and anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And she selectively edited and published his work, twisting it to fit her views.
Views that Nietzsche himself opposed.
Vehemently opposed.
Yeah.
He was explicitly critical of anti-Semitism and German nationalism. But Elizabeth's editions created this false link between Nietzsche and, well, eventually Nazism and fascism.
That's a serious distortion.
A profound and damaging one.
Yeah.
Thankfully, scholars later on, people like Walter Kaufmann in the mid-20th century, did the hard work of untangling it all.
So they went back to the original text.
Exactly. They corrected the record, showing how Elizabeth had manipulated things. It allowed for a much more accurate understanding of his actual philosophy.
It's good that correction happened. Despite all that, his influence eventually shone through.
Massively, especially from the 1960s onwards. His ideas have had a huge impact on 20th and 21st century thought, philosophy, psychology, literature, you name it.
And particularly existentialism, which brings us back to our series.
Right. He's often seen as a key forerunner, or even a type of existentialist thinker.
Okay, that's crucial background. Let's dive into one of those core ideas then. The will to power. What did Nietzsche mean by that?
Right. Der Wille zur Macht. It's fundamental. He saw it as the basic underlying drive in humans, maybe in all life.
More fundamental than, say, the drive to survive.
Yeah, that's the key distinction he makes. He argued that things like self-preservation aren't the primary goal. They're often more like a consequence.
A consequence of what?
A consequence of this deeper drive, this will to power, which is about growth, overcoming, mastering, exerting strength, having an impact on the world.
So it's less about just staying alive and more about affirming life by shaping it?
Exactly. It's an active striving, not just a passive clinging to existence. It's about discharging strength.
How did that compare to other ideas floating around at the time?
Well, it was pretty radical. You had Schopenhauer, who influenced Nietzsche early on, talking about a blind, aimless will to live.
Kind of pessimistic.
Very. And then you had utilitarianism, focusing on maximizing happiness or pleasure as the main goal.
And Nietzsche wasn't buying that.
Not at all. He thought happiness wasn't something you aim for directly.
Yeah.
It was more like a side effect.
A side effect of?
Of overcoming obstacles.
Yeah.
Of successfully exerting your will to power. That feeling of power, of accomplishment, that's where the real deep satisfaction comes from, not just passive pleasure.
That makes intuitive sense, actually. The things you struggle for often feel more rewarding.
Precisely. The feeling of overcoming resistance. Now, Nietzsche even speculated a bit further.
Oh, So.
He mused, mostly in his unpublished notes, mind you, whether this will-to-power dynamic might not just apply to life, but maybe even to the physical universe itself.
Like in physics, inorganic matter.
Sort of. He was influenced by thinkers like Ruder Bosovich, who rejected simple atomism, the idea of tiny, inert bits of matter in favor of centers of force interacting. Nietzsche wondered if all reality could be understood as this interplay of wills to power.
Wow, okay, that's a much bigger claim. Was he definite about that?
No, not really. He considered it more of a hypothesis, and scholars still debate how far he intended to take it. Was it primarily a psychological or social concept, or truly a metaphysical one?
So the jury's still out on whether it's a human drive or a cosmic principle.
Pretty much. The unpublished notes hint at the broader scope, but his published work focuses more on the human, psychological, and cultural dimensions. It's complex.
Okay, so we have this fundamental drive, this will to power, this striving. How does the Übermensch fit in? That's the other big one we wanted to tackle.
Right. The Übermensch, often translated as overmen, or maybe more famously but also problematically, Superman.
And this arises from...
It's Nietzsche's response to a crisis he perceived, the death of God. He famously proclaimed this, particularly in works like Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Which didn't mean a literal deity dying, right? More like...
Exactly. It meant the declining authority of traditional religion and metaphysics, the Christian God specifically, as the source of absolute values and meaning in Western culture.
So a void was opening up?
A huge void. And Nietzsche worried it could lead to nihilism, the sense that nothing matters, no values are real. The Übermensch is his proposed answer to that potential nihilism.
How so? What does the Übermensch do?
Übermensch is the figure who can overcome this nihilism by creating new values.
Yeah.
Values that affirm life here and now on Earth.
Creating them themselves, not getting them from tradition or religion.
Precisely. It involves transcending conventional morality, what Nietzsche saw as the herd morality of good and evil, and forging one's own path, defining one's own meaning.
So it's about self-mastery and breaking free from the crowd.
Yes, a kind of spiritual self-overcoming. Rejecting resentment, rejecting otherworldly hopes, and embracing earthly existence in its fullness.
You mentioned the herd. Nietzsche contrasts the Übermensch with another figure, doesn't he? The last man.
He does, yes. The last man, der letzte Mensch, is presented in Zarathustra as the opposite of the Übermensch. He represents, well, ultimate complacency.
Complacency, how?
The last man seeks only comfort, security, and trivial pleasures. No great aspirations, no risks, no striving. Everyone is equal, but equally mediocre and passionless. Just wanting a long life and, easily digestible entertainment.
Sounds pretty bleak.
Nietzsche saw it as a real danger of modernity, this leveling down, this loss of ambition for anything higher. The last man is incapable of creating anything new. He's the obstacle to the Übermensch.
So the Übermensch strives and creates, while the last man just exists comfortably.
That's a good way to put it. Now, there's another complex idea sometimes linked to the Übermensch, the eternal return.
Ah, yes, the idea that everything will repeat infinitely.
Exactly. The thought experiment. What if every moment of your life, joys and sorrows, were to recur eternally, exactly the same way? Could you embrace that?
That's a heavy thought. How does it connect?
Some interpretations suggest that the Übermensch is the one who can affirm the eternal return, who can say yes to life so completely, even with all its suffering, that they would will its infinite repetition.
Because that affirmation is key to creating values that are truly life-affirming.
That's the idea. It means creating values without resentment, without wishing things were different. A total embrace of existence. It's a profound challenge.
It really is. Now, we absolutely have to address the elephant in the room with the Übermensch concept.
The Nazi connection, yes. It's unavoidable and, frankly, tragic.
How did that happen, given what you said about Nietzsche's own views?
It goes back partly to his sister's manipulation, but also the Nazis just.
Yeah.
They seized on the term and the imagery, twisting it horribly. They turned this idea of spiritual self-overcoming into a justification for their disgusting racial ideology and actions.
A complete perversion.
Absolutely. We have to be crystal clear. Nietzsche himself condemned anti-Semitism. He broke with his publisher over it. He fell out with Wagner partly over Wagner's growing nationalism and anti-Semitism.
So the Nazi interpretation is just fundamentally wrong based on his own writings and actions.
Fundamentally wrong. It's crucial to separate Nietzsche's complex, often provocative philosophy from its later grotesque misappropriation. Though we should add a layer of nuance from his friend Franz Overbeck.
Oh, what did Overbeck say?
Overbeck recalled that some of Nietzsche's private remarks about Jews seemed to him quite severe, perhaps stemming more from his intense anti-Christian feelings than traditional anti-Semitism. It adds complexity, but still doesn't align it with Nazi ideology.
Right. Important context. So let's tie these two main threads together. How does the will to power relate directly to the Übermensch?
Okay, so think of the will to power as the engine, the fundamental drive within us to grow, overcome, create, exert influence.
The basics driving.
Yes. The Übermensch, then, is the embodiment of this will to power fully realized and consciously directed. It's the individual who harnesses that drive not just for survival or crude domination, but for self-mastery and the creation of new life-affirming values.
So the Übermensch is the will to power actively shaping meaning in the wake of the death of God.
That's a great way to put it. The Übermensch doesn't just passively accept life or despair over its challenges. They embrace the whole thing, potentially even the eternal return, and actively shapes their existence and values. It's a powerful manifestation of the will to power.
This is fascinating stuff, really digging into the philosophy. But why should someone listening today, care about these century-old ideas? How are they relevant?
Well, I think they offer a really powerful lens for looking at our own lives. They're not just abstract concepts.
How so?
They push you to think about your own motivations. What really drives you? Is it just comfort, like the last man? Or is there something more, a desire to overcome, to create something meaningful?
So it's about self-reflection, understanding your own will to power, maybe.
Exactly. What obstacles are you trying to overcome? What values are you living by? Are they genuinely yours or just ones you've passively accepted from society, from the herd?
That idea of creating your own values is pretty challenging, but also kind of liberating, isn't it?
It is. Nietzsche forces us to confront that tension. The comfort of fitting in versus the difficulty, the struggle of forging your own path, of striving for self-overcoming.
It makes you question things you might take for granted about your own life and choices.
Definitely.
Yeah.
What is your will to power aiming at? What kind of values are guiding your actions? Nietzsche doesn't give easy answers, but he asks profound questions.
So what does this all mean? Hopefully this deep dive into Nietzsche's Übermensch and will to power has given you some food for thought, some real insights into his pretty complex philosophy.
Yeah, we've seen how he was wrestling with these huge questions. Human nature, morality, where to find meaning when the old answers are fading.
And clearly these ideas, the Übermensch, the will to power, they still provoke debate. They still inspire. They're still incredibly relevant for how we understand ourselves in the world.
Absolutely. They resonate.
Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about.
Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.